All right, hello again, everyone, and welcome to our Sea Otter exhibit. If you're just joining us, you're all here at the perfect time. You can see we're just being joined by some of my friends from the Otter Care team, and they're getting started with our morning feeding and training session. So on exhibit today, we have 3 of our 5 resident otters. They're starting off this training session the same way they always do, with something we've called stationing. So you'll saw they started off by positioning themselves on a part of the deck, joined by the trainer they're working with. Now our trainers are practicing different behaviors with our girls, giving us an inside look at some of their daily routine care. The different behaviors our trainers practice with our otters is also how we'll be feeding them. They're using a method called positive reinforcement. So they're talking with our otters, asking them to do those different behaviors and either positively reinforcing or rewarding them when they do the correct behavior. Naturally, you might wonder, what happens if our otter does a different behavior? Well, no worries, folks. Everyone is going to receive all of their reward and food for today, and our trainers can simply shift gears and ask the otters to do a different behavior they might feel more comfortable with for the day. And again, this is just to maintain a comfortable bond between our otters and their trainers. Southern sea otters are wild animals, so making sure that they're comfortable with their animal care is important to their safety as well as their trainers. So a few of those different behaviors we're seeing today could range from what we call animal care or husbandry. For example, we see our friend who's been asked to climb onto the deck. They're being asked to follow that buoy, the target there, being asked to move around the exhibit in different ways. When she's asked to touch her nose on that buoy, that gives our trainer a chance to get a closer inspection of her teeth, face, fur, making sure she's in her best care. I mentioned we have 3 of our 5 otters on exhibit today. Let me go ahead and introduce who you're seeing. We have Rosa, Ruby, and Selka on exhibit. On the far right-hand side, that is our friend Rosa. You can see that Rosa's got a nice blonde head, whereas our other 2 otters are more chocolatey brunette. Up on the deck there, I believe that is Selka, our most chocolatey brunette otter, whereas on the far left-hand side is Ruby, our youngest sea otter. As I mentioned, we're seeing our trainers practice different sorts of animal care behaviors with our girls. These would help make sure that our otters are comfortable with their trainers and their daily routine care. Some other examples could be, again, our girls being asked to climb up onto the deck, something we call decking out, then being asked to swim back into the water, giving our trainers a chance to get a closer inspection of their agility, both inside and out of the water. Another type of behavior we might see our otters practicing is something we call enrichment. Enrichment keeps our girls mentally and physically stimulated. It also can help them practice some of their natural behaviors they use to survive in the wild. So for example, we see a few different enrichment items on exhibit today. On the far right-hand side, we can see a kiddie pool in the water, or on the left-hand side, you see some of that car wash kelp. These items help our otters move around their exhibit in new and challenging ways, keeping them mentally and physically stimulated. For you or me, enrichment could be something like reading a book or going for a walk. For our otters here, that could be swimming from the otter spa there on the far left over to the kiddie pool, perhaps even challenging themselves to climb inside. As I mentioned, enrichment could also help our otters practice their natural and wild skills. In the wild, our otters can consume up to 25% of their body weight in a day, and that's for a good reason. You might have noticed that our otters have 3 scheduled feedings today, and that's not the only time of day they're fed. Sea otters are marine mammals, but don't have a thick layer of fat called blubber that other marine mammals have to keep warm. They rely on their high metabolism, eating lots and lots of food throughout the day to maintain their body warmth. And then they rely on their dense fur coats to trap that body heat in. As I mentioned, this is an important reason our otters are fed 3 times a day. But practicing those natural skills such as diving, foraging, and grooming are important for our otters to hone. Not only does it help them survive in the wild, but it helps them with a few important jobs they have here at the aquarium. On exhibit like we see them today, our otters act as ambassadors for their species, teaching us and researchers what it means to be an otter and showing us how to better conserve this fragile population. You see, southern sea otters are still considered an endangered species. And while our otters here have all been rescued and deemed non-releasable by the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, this is not where their connection to their wild counterparts ends. Behind the scenes, they have a very important job where they can act as foster moms. The aquarium has a one-of-a-kind sea otter surrogacy program, where pups in the wild who have been rescued can be brought to our care and paired up with these otters on exhibit. Behind the scenes, our girls will teach these pups everything they need to know to survive. So eventually, these pups can be released back out into the wild. An incredible example of how the aquarium and our girls right here on exhibit have a direct contribution to the recovery of their threatened population. If you'd like to learn more about that sea otter surrogacy program, I definitely invite you to swing by our auditorium. We have a program called Luna, a sea otter story, and this follows the story all about a young otter pup named Luna and her journey through that surrogacy program. It'll be playing today at 2 o'clock and 11:30. Swing by a couple minutes early to grab a good seat. But back to our otters on exhibit here. As I mentioned, we're going to see them practicing a few different enrichment activities, behaviors that'll help them practice some of their natural skills. Some of those other enrichment behaviors we might see our girls practicing today could also be something we call a retrieval behavior. Our girls will be handed toys, and these toys not only are cute to see our otters play with, but they can be stuffed with some of the otters' favorite foods. Then this challenges our otters to retrieve the tasty treats from inside. They can do something called a retrieval behavior, retrieving the toys that it might have sank to the bottom of the exhibit, presenting them to their trainer up at the top of the surface. Just like they would in the wild, hunting and diving, foraging for invertebrates that live at the bottom of their kelp forest habitats, and bringing them up to the surface to eat. You might also see them taking these toys and using what we call a tool-using skills to break them open and get to the tasty foods inside. Our otters, as I mentioned, are tool users. They can use objects like their hard jaws, strong teeth, or a rock or shell to help crack into the hard-shelled animals that they eat. You see, southern sea otters consume invertebrates. These are animals who don't have a backbone, but typically have a hard shell to protect themselves. So our otters employ those tool-using skills to crack into those shells. You might see them taking some of those toys and even bringing them over to the windows, trying to bang them against the glass and get to the tasty foods inside. In fact, folks, this is part of the reason we feed our otters their hard-shelled animals behind the scenes. You might have noticed they don't have any of those hard shells here on exhibit. They are being fed a tasty, yummy 3-course meal of shrimp, squid, and clam. But you might have noticed that those clams don't have a shell. And as I mentioned, that's for a good reason. Originally, when we did give our otters those hard shells foods on exhibit, their favorite tool to use to crack them open, just like you guessed it with those toys, is actually those windows you're all looking through. That's right, folks. They quickly became pretty scratched up, and we learned to give them those animals with the shells behind the scenes, where they can enjoy using their tool-using skills to crack them open with no acrylic windows to worry about. With that being said, folks, it does look like we're wrapping up with our feeding for today, but keep an eye out for another one of my favorite activities to watch our otters do. Their grooming behaviors. As I mentioned, those dense fur coats are very important to our otters' safety and keeping them warm and waterproof in their cold water habitats. They do what we call a grooming behavior, giving themselves a nice full body scratch, insulating a layer of air into their fur coat. So keep an eye out for those nice full body scratches now that they're done eating. And my favorite part, if they've done a good job grooming, you can actually see some of those air bubbles escaping from their fur as they dive down. No, folks, those aren't otter farts. It's just a great example of the good work our girls have done grooming. But again, it looks like we've wrapped up the feeding for today. Feel free to come find me if you have any more otter curiosities or questions. My name is Anevay up here on the second floor of the exhibit. But if you're continuing on your adventure for today, thank you so much for joining us, and hope you all have an utterly fantastic day here at the Monterey Bay Aquarium.